All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and continue with Standard 9E, the scramble for Africa. So let's set the stage. Industrialization stirred ambitions in many European countries. They wanted more resources to fuel industrial production. So to gain these resources, the industrial nations looked to Africa for raw materials. So the takeover of Africa. Christian missionary David Livingstone began to live with a group of Africans in the late 1860s. When no one heard from him for several years, a reporter, Henry Stanley, was sent to Africa to find him. After he found Livingstone, Stanley began to explore Africa for himself, and his reports on the bountiful land made many European countries want to establish colonies. So Africa is going to be very rich in these raw materials that European countries, these industrial countries, are looking for. So the forces driving imperialism. First one we're going to have is the Industrial Revolution. So the drive to add more land and gain resources and markets in which to sell products. That is a big one. Need more land to get more resources and markets in order to sell those products made by those machines. The second is the belief in European superiority. So the race for colonies grew out of a strong sense of national pride. Europeans viewed an empire as a measure of the greatness of a nation. So the more land that a European country had meant that they were greater than everybody else. And this is going to lead to racism, which is the belief that a particular race is superior or better than others. Factors promoting imperialism. European technological superiority, we're going to have two big things that you need to know. We're going to have that automatic machine gun, and we're going to have the steam engine, which leads to railroads and steamboats. Then we're going to have the invention of quinine. Quinine is a drug that prevented Europeans from catching malaria, which had kept them confined to the coasts of Africa until 1829. And then we're going to have Africa's vast size. Africa's ginormous. And it's going to have a diverse population, which is going to lead to a lack of unity between the tribes in Africa, which is going to make it easier for the Europeans to dominate the continent. It's going to be easy for other tribes to turn against other tribes and help the Europeans gather more land and more resources for their needs. So the division of Africa. No European country wanted to be left out of the race to gain land in Africa. So they're going to have a conference in Berlin in 1884, which is called the Berlin Conference, where 14 European nations met to lay down the laws for claiming land in Africa. Little thought was used when dividing the land, so tribal and language boundaries were ignored. And by 1914, only Liberia and Ethiopia remained free. So here's a map of Africa. You could see the blue color, which were the areas that were dominated and controlled by France. This light purple color, this violet color, are areas controlled by the British. You have the yellow, which are the areas that were controlled by Germany. Red, not very much, controlled by Spain. Green was controlled by Portugal. Pink, controlled by Belgium. Orange, controlled by Italy. And then here in white, 1 and 2, those were independent. All right, so raw materials are the key. The major source of wealth in Africa was not the new markets for goods, but the large amounts of mineral resources. Africa is rich in copper, tin, gold, and diamonds. Cash crop plantations were successful at growing peanuts, palm oil, cocoa, and rubber. Imperialism affects other parts of the world. So even though we are focusing on the imperialist takeover of Africa, imperialism also played a major role in the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, the Americas, and other underdeveloped lands. So imperialism is not just an African problem, which is going to jump us right into our next set of notes, which is we're going to talk about Asia. So let's go to China. We're going to have an open door policy in China. So in 1899, the United States declared an open door policy in China as a way to prevent other nations from splitting up China into colonies. The U.S. wanted China to remain open to merchant ships from all nations. This policy worked out for both the United States and China. The U.S. got to keep its trading rights, and China is not going to be colonized. So what we see here is a map of China where, because China is not going to be colonized, the European countries are going to set up what are called spheres of influence. Those areas that the certain European country has trading rights. So right here, this orange color is going to belong to the Portuguese. That's where the Portuguese can go ahead and come in and trade their goods. And then we have this pink area, which are the British. The yellow area, Russian. The blue areas, Japan. Purple area is French. And the little green area is German. So the Germans can't go into the Portuguese area and trade. They have to stay in their little sphere of influence. So now let's move to Japan. We're going to have the end of isolation in Japan. Last time we talked about Japan, we had said that they entered a period of isolation, which is going to lead them up to about the time period of World War I. So which means we're getting ready to get into World War I, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so Japan realized that the industrial technology of the West was far superior to that of Japan. In 1854, the Japanese signed the Treaty of Kanagawa, which allowed U.S. ships to trade in 2 ports. As the U.S. pushed open the door into Japan, other Western nations were soon to follow, and Japan was no longer isolated from the outside world. So this is when Japan's going to be able to catch up with all the technology it's missed out on from being isolated. All right, now let's jump into India. So the British have control in India. In the 1600s, we had already learned this, English traders form the group called the East India Company. It became a rich and powerful trading company that dominated India by 1857. Great Britain are going to brutally put down the Indian people's revolts. And Great Britain's government discriminates against the people, and it tries to force the Indians to change their ancient ways. So to get rid of that caste system. And we are talking about Indians, the people who are actually from India. All right, so Great Britain invests in the Indian economy by developing railroads, which we see down here, all-weather roads, which we see right here, good for year-round transportation and trade. And then we have schools. We are going to have the response of colonized people. We had said that there are going to be 2 different responses. You're going to have armed conflict and then an intellectual movement. And so this first one we're going to talk about is an armed conflict. An armed conflict is violent. So for example, we're going to have the Boxer Rebellion, which is a group of poor Chinese workers. They rose up against foreign rule. Their resistance was stopped but their revolt led to reforms or changes within China. And the other response, we have intellectual movements, and these are non-violent. So, for example, we have Gandhi. I think everybody recognizes his face. This is Gandhi. He's going to have peaceful protests and hunger strikes to get his point across as his response to the colonized India. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the flipped class video number 37. You have one more set of notes to take in Standard 9 before we get into reviewing for our test. All right, if you have any questions, like always, please come see me, and I look forward to seeing y'all on the flip side.